Before we continue with Webots and the software, we are going to take a small detour where I'm going to try to explain you a few of basic things about programming languages. Because in order to control the robot, how a robot operates, as we have been speaking about, we will need to design for each robot a different controller. And the way we have to design these controllers is through programming, which in which case is going to be Python. So the following videos and slides are going to be like a very brief introduction to some of the basic things you need to know about Python. If you're already an expert on Python, you can probably skip this and go to the task. Or if you, for example, are an expert on C, C++, Java, or one of the similar languages, this is probably going to be easy for you. If you have never done any programming before, maybe it's going to be a bit challenging, I hope not, but I will try to cover the basics. But I think programming is one of these things that you learn more like doing and doing mistakes and fixing them than watching videos or tutorials. Anyway, starting with the basics. A programming language is a vocabulary and a set of grammatical rules for instructing a computer or computer devices to perform a specific task. For example, PowerPoint, the software I'm using now, was written using a programming language, probably C. The video games that you play, were programmed using a programming language. So, for example, someone programmed that, when the user clicks up on the gamepad, the main character is going to move forward, or things like that. Someone had to program the relation between inputs, outputs. And here I'm trying to put one example so that you realize that even though maybe you have never programmed before, you have done like many similar things on your day-to-day life, and programming is actually not that different to a cooking recipe. So in a cooking recipe, if you think about it, you have two types of things. You have like the ingredients, which is the vocabulary, and you also have the actions or instructions that tell you what to do with the ingredients. So for example, if we check like this very simple recipe here, which is called like banana Nutella, you start with a piece of bread, so this is your ingredient, and you need to toast it. So this is like a task that you need to do. And then you need to get some Nutella, which is like another ingredient, and you need to spread it on the toast, which is another action. And then you get a banana, which is your third ingredient, and then you slice it and you put it on the bread. And this is the end of your recipe. So when you read this as a human, you know how to prepare this recipe. So a programming language is going to be very similar to this, but humans are going to tell computers what to do. So here something that is important is that, as I was saying, a programming language is a vocabulary and a set of grammatical rules. So let's focus on this. No? A recipe can say something like bake tomatoes for 20 minutes, and bake for 20 minutes is the instruction. It can be bake, cut, slice, or something, and then it can be like 20 minutes, 1 hour, or whatever. And tomato is part of the vocabulary. But think about this, if you were reading a recipe book and it said something like bake the guitar for 3 meters, it doesn't make any sense. Like bake in the context of cooking makes sense, but the guitar doesn't make any sense. And 3 meters, it's not the kind of like instruction that you would expect near bake. So, programming language is going to be very careful about this. It's going to be very careful that all the actions that we do make sense in the context of programming. There are many different programming languages around, and here in this course we are going to use Python because it's one of the easiest ones and it's also one of the more powerful ones. So the first thing we are going to speak about when speaking about programming in Python in particular are going to be variables. So variables in the context of programming are very similar to ingredients on a cooking recipe. They are the elements we operate with. You have used variables before many times in maths. For example, when you did, in high school or maybe a few years ago, when you did something like x equals 2, you are you are assigning the value 2 to the variable x. And then, so from this point on, on your exercise, every time you use x, you're actually meaning 2. So this means that x is holding this value. And later on, maybe you also did something like y equals 5x plus 6, where you are assigning to y the result of the operation 5x plus 6. So for example, if you imagine that x here is 2, and you had like a sentence, like a statement like y equals 5x plus 6, x could be converted to 2 because it's value. So that could be like 5 multiplied by 2, which is 10, plus 6. So then this is going to mean that y is going to be 16. So, in math, you have, used variables many times to assign values, or you use, one variable to assign the value of another variable. So this is basically the same, in programming languages. And more technically, variables are the names you give to computer memory locations, which are used to store values in a computer program. So for example, in your programming routine, in your programming script, if you define something like x equals 2, it means that there is going to be a portion of the memory in your computer which is going to be allocated to x, and it's going to hold the value of 2. And then finally, we call them variables because their value can change as the program is executed. So for example, my program can start with something like x equals 2, and then I do some other things. And then I do something like x equals 3, meaning that, I can change its value continuously. So now you can do something to test by yourself. So I'm going to click escape here, and then you can open a Python terminal. And in order to do this, in Windows, you are going to type cmd. Let's see if it appears here, cmd. And then you will get the command prompt like this. And now you can click Python. And you will get the Python interpreter like this. So the way we assign and declare variables in Python is very similar to math. So I can say like x equals 2. And from now on, x is going to have the value 2. So for example, if I type x now, it's going to say 2, meaning that x holds the value of 2. Variables, the good thing about variables is that, as we said before, they just point to a region of memory, and the name itself, doesn't matter. So we can actually use any kind of name. So for example, let's say I'm going to put as a name like tomatoes equals 10. So I have created a variable which the name is tomatoes, and this variable has a value of 10. So now if I click on tomatoes, it says 10. As I said on the slides, I can, something quite common. I can say something like pi is equals 3.14. And then if I click play, it appears like that. Or I can say like x equals 25. Yeah, which means that x is going to be 25. And you can see that I can, assign integer numbers like 25, or I can also assign like floating numbers like 3.14. Something that is quite interesting is that later on I can do like x equals x plus 1. I think this sentence in maths doesn't make sense, but in computer science it does. This sentence means that x, is going to be evaluated to 25. I am going to increase the value on 1, and I'm going to save it on x again. So if I do this, and now I click x, you can see that x is going to be 26. And the last thing on the exercise, I am going to leave this for you as an exercise to think about. But, if I type pi equals pi plus x, remembering that now x is 26 and pi is 314, what's going to be the value of pi. So let's go to the next slide. So when writing code, as you could see, there are two types of statements. The one we have seen before, they are normal statements like x equals 25 or x equals x plus 1 or things like this. these are the statements that they are going to be executed by the computer. But there is also another very important type of statement, which in programming languages, this is called a comment. Comments, so while normal statements are executed by the computer, comments are completely ignored. So anything that we in our programming language we add as a comment is not going to be executed. So some of you might wonder then what's the point? Why are we using comments if it's never going to happen? Well, comments are probably even more important than normal statements, because they make the source code easier to read for humans. So for example, imagine that you're reading some code with hundreds of lines and suddenly you find something like x equals x plus 25. In the context of your program, that doesn't make any sense. Imagine that your program is like a video game and suddenly it says x equals 25. You have no idea what that means. So probably a person would put a comment saying something like x means the HP points of the main character and we are increasing the HP on 25 or something like that. In Python, comments are lines that start with the, I don't know what's the name of this sign now, like the cross sign, like the one with the cross sign. Or this is going to be like a single line starting with this sign is going to be a comment, it's going to be ignored. Or blocks of line that start with 3 quotation marks. I think in this example it's going to be easier to understand. So for example, I have a line in my code which is like ampersand. This is a comment. This is going to be completely ignored. And then I can have like 3 quotations mark and I can have like blocks of lines. So the ampersand only works for one line. The quotation marks work like for any number of lines. So I can have like a 100 lines here describing my thing. And then I finish with 3 quotation marks. So everything there is going to be also a comment. So let's see an example to finish this video. So as I was saying, let's say I have a variable which is like x equals 25, no? And now I see that x equals is 25. If I do x equals x plus 1, now x is going to be 26. So now I'm going to add a line which is going to be a comment. So I'm going to put here an ampersand and I'm going to say x equals x plus 1. So in theory, this line is going to increase the value of x by 1, so you'd expect to be 27. But because we are starting our line with the ampersand, it's not going to be executed. So now I click x, and now it's going to be 26. The good thing about comments is that, in Python, when you write a statement, it needs to follow the rules of the programming language. So for example, if I say x equals z plus 1, it's going to complain and it is going to say that z is not defined, z doesn't exist, so there is a name error here. So you need to be very careful that everything follows the rules. You need to declare every variable before using it and so on. When you write comments, this doesn't matter. I can write something in English like, this is a comment and it's not going to complain, it's going to be fine. On the other hand, if I type like this is a comment, it will say there that there is an error. So this is the end of this video where, we try to introduce programming languages. We try to speak briefly about variables in Python and finally about comments.